My name is Patricia Coulter, and I was the first managing director of INROADS in Philadelphia. I held several different positions, but starting as managing director of Philadelphia, which was the 12th INROADS affiliate, and we were the first affiliate in the Northeast part of the country. I went from being the managing director. Then in 1985, I added responsibilities. I still was managing director, but then I also became regional director and assisted with opening affiliates in Baltimore and in Richmond, Virginia. And then in 1990, I did relinquish the managing director role and then became regional vice president for what was then known as the Eastern region of INROADS. I think INROADS for me was not really a job. You know, I went into it as a job, but once I got into it, I realized what a wonderful fit it was for me, both intellectually and politically and spiritually, because it connected my heart with a mission, right? And a mission that I firmly believed in. And I think with that, I was able to make the most of my time there because it felt like we were really making a difference in something that was important, in the world. Um, I remember saying to myself during those days, I love my job. I love my job. And it was the first time that I had ever been able to say that. And even after I left INROADS and went on to other opportunities, I was always sort of seeking that other position that I could love on the same level that I loved INROADS. And fortunate for me, I did find that later on when I became the president and CEO of the Urban League in Philadelphia. So it was really more of a calling. Actually, we used to say back in the INROADS days, this is not a job, this is a calling. And I think it really felt that for me because so much of the work was being driven by your passion and your love for community and for the work that we were doing. My understanding at the time was that INROADS sort of laid out a plan, and the plan was based on different cities, urban cities that they would open operations in. And so Philadelphia, interestingly, was not on the plan. However, what happened in 1980, yes, I believe it's 1980, Business Week magazine published an article entitled, I think I still have this correct, From Ghetto to Management. And the article got the attention of a gentleman in Philadelphia who was the chief financial officer of a company called, at that time, they were called ARA Services. This is in 1980. And he had someone on his staff look into this, like, what is this article about and how does this work and so forth. And he reached out to Frank Carr and then I think to Mark Stanfield, who came into Philadelphia to meet with Joseph Neubauer, who became the chair of my board, the Philadelphia board, but he was also more so a mentor and to this day, a good friend of mine. But that article really touched him because of his own experience in coming to this country and having received help from people for him to go to college. And he said that after reading it, he thought everybody needs this, and particularly young people who are struggling in urban cities where there was so much going on. And so he wanted to know how to get it going. And so, of course, that was music to Mort and Frank because he was willing to put some money behind it to get it started. And one of the things about INROADS that I was fascinated about and that I learned so much from about was how it was structured financially. Because most nonprofits, um, which I subsequently went on to run a major nonprofit and learned more about this, but many nonprofits are funded through different sources, and one major source is generally government funding, you know, grants and that type of thing. But INROADS didn't have any of that. INROADS was strictly it was almost like a pay-as-you-go kind of operation, right? And I remember when I was hired, the money that I was hired on was just the money that had been raised for the startup of Philadelphia. And then from that point, I worked alone until we could get commitments to have so many interns that would then fund, you know, the number of interns, and then I was able to hire someone. So all of that was for me, just it was almost like getting an MBA, you know, a crash course in an MBA, you know, rather than sitting in a classroom learning. I was out in the streets of Philadelphia learning how to operate a business. So the entrepreneurial aspects of the work, to me, it was intriguing, and it was also very gratifying because I learned so much about business, and at the same time was able to see how you could take those business concepts and use them for good in the community. I'm sure every person like me that you talk to will say that they had the best companies. They had the best companies of the whole INROADS operation. Um, and certainly I would say that about Philadelphia because given the fact that we were, first of all, as I said earlier, not really on the plan. And I remember when I was hired, Reagan, my first day on the job was April 1st of 1981. And I kind of remember thinking of it like, okay, is this an April Fool's joke? Because Mort was like, okay, so you have the job, and you know, here's what I need you to do. I need you to get at least 17 to 20 companies and at least 25 interns, and have them all in place by June the 1st. This was April. This was April. And then he said, okay, so I'm going back to Pittsburgh, and give me a call if you need anything. He will actually not say it that way because honestly, Mort was extraordinarily supportive. I would not have been able to do anything I did without his support and without his guidance. But I framed it that way because for me, it was pretty alarming, right? Because here's something I've never done before. There was no one else doing it in the city that I could call on. So I was kind of out there like trying to feel my way. So the challenges, I'm not going to say they were many, but they were always kind of hanging around, you know. And I will start with the sort of humorous story I told in the beginning, which was just learning what to do, you know, in the beginning. It was the first time I had been in like a solo position. You know, there's no supervisor there, right? You know, in the next room over. First of all, I didn't even have office space when we started in Philadelphia. I was working out of my apartment then. Okay. And I had a 2-year-old son, and, you know, so it was like a lot of things, and only a rotary telephone. Or maybe it was push button by 1981. It may have been a push button telephone. So that was kind of like the beginning of, wow, you've got to use some ingenuity. We've got to figure out how to get this done. So Joe Neubauer, I go to him and say, I've got to have a place to work. You know, I need an office space. They gave me an office space at ARA, and I was able to, you know, at least look professional, inside of an office. I had a copier at that time, I think it was still a typewriter. In 1981, I'm pretty sure we didn't have computers in 1981. So I had a typewriter. Oh, it was an electric typewriter, though. Do you even know what that is? You probably don't. An electric typewriter. I had access to copy machines and all those things. So it felt better. It felt like I was actually working in the office. But I used to see myself as wearing different hats. So one moment I would be the managing director and I'm on the phone making calls and getting appointments scheduled. Then I would be like my own assistant, where I'm typing the letters and getting out, all the reports and all of that. And then, I would take that hat off and be engaged in speaking or giving presentations. And so it was this constant sort of change hats, okay, now you need to do this. And it wasn't until, I guess I worked alone up until, it started in April, and I believe it was almost a year. It was like the following February or March before I was able to hire my first staff person. And so that was a major hurdle for me to get over. However, I learned so much in that time frame, so much about my own strengths, my own capabilities, learned so much about, again, business aspects, particularly financial. So I think I was more, a little less confident when it came to professional financial statements and understanding how to read them and understand what was saying and what kind of information had to go in there. And so learning that through the gentleman who was the chair of my finance committee, who at the time he was a partner at one of the major accounting firms. And he called me in his office one day, or I went to his office begging for help. That's really what happened. And he said, Pat, he said, don't worry about it. He said, you can learn this. He said, it's not as complicated as it looks. And he said, I'm going to help you. And when you have a question, do not hesitate to ask your question. And that for me was very comforting. And I think it helped me overcome that challenge. INROADS' mission was something that for me, and if I recall it, to develop and place talented minority youth in leadership positions. Yes, in leadership positions in corporate America and in the community. I guess there are three words in that mission that really resonate with me. The first one, to develop. That was such a key aspect of the INROADS work with its interns and students. It was so different than anything I'd ever known in terms of the model of how it was structured, because today we think about excuse me, a lot of things around, we call it training, training and development, and you learn, certain things. The INROADS development of the interns, much of that work was focused on what Frank Carr used to call the written rules, the unwritten rules. We're going to help you understand and learn the rules that are never written down anywhere when it comes to working in corporate America or to leading in your community, right? And I found that fascinating. I found it fascinating because it was a mission that was deeper than just learning a task or learning how to, perform, in terms of giving a presentation. All of those things were part of our training, but the parts around, here are the things that people aren't going to tell you. There's not going to be a manual when you get there that tells you how to build relationships with your mentor or with your business coordinator or with the people on your working team, right? So things about how to handle having a paycheck and what do you do with your money, and how does all of that work? There's not a lot of manuals, at least not in 1981 or 82, that help you understand how to do those things. So that was a part of the mission, the development part. The second word for me was the leadership aspect. And what I loved about the leadership aspect of the mission was that it was saying, not only are we going to help you become successful in a corporate environment, but we want you to take that success and then push it out into your community, bring others in like you, open doors for others in your community, do things, become leaders, get on nonprofit boards where you can have decision-making power, where you can help make policies around things that are happening in your community. So the leadership was key to that. And then the final two words would have been corporate and community. Not only just leading and becoming a successful corporate executive, right? But understanding your role as a corporate executive, and then the responsibility that that gives you as far as your community and your overall environment are concerned. So to me, the mission of INROADS was something that I solely related to. And I remember when I learned about Frank Carr and his inspiration, from the March on Washington when he visited the March on Washington in 1963, and how he came out of that, sort of feeling that he needed to do something. It's like it's an individual, it's from one individual to another. And that inspired me. It really inspired me because I believe that as well, just from my my family upbringing and my family, we are great believers in faith, and we believe that each person has to do their part, right? To make the world a better place. And when I learned of Frank's inspiration, and then how he went about it with being a graduate of Princeton University, and talking to one of his roommates, former roommates, who at that time had a very big corporate job, and saying to them, here's what I want to do. I want to help, kids from, I think he said, ghettos and barrios, help them learn survival skills. And his roommate said at the time, or his former roommate said, well, Frank, I think Black and brown youth, they already have survival skills, just because their families have this long history, in America, of surviving. He said, but here's where I think they could use some help. And that is in the corporate environment, where you don't see Black and brown people leading in corporate America. So how about we, turn that from, like teaching them just survival techniques. There was a program, I can't remember what it was called, Outward Bound, Outward Bound type experience, to teaching them how to survive in a corporate environment. And so those are the aspects of the mission for me that really resonated. And I was able to just buy in, lock, stock, and barrel. It was like, yes, I can do this, and I want to do this. Yeah, one of my great memories had to do with how we engaged people of some notoriety, I'll say, into the INROADS experience without paying fees, such as speaking fees and things like that. And this was something that was taught to me, again, by my mentor, Joseph Neubauer, when we were having our first Philadelphia awards dinner. It was the first one, I think it was 1983. And we wanted to have I thought it would be more attractive to people to come and buy tables and tickets and all that kind of stuff if we had like a well-known name speaker, right? And so the board kind of agreed with that, but yet we didn't want to we weren't going to spend the INROADS money, to to do that. So it was like, so I said one day at a board meeting, I was like, well, who do you all know? Like, who do you know? Can't we get, I know you must know people. And honestly, as a result of that, the very first dinner, I thought of asking Julius Irving, who is well known as Dr. J of the Philadelphia 76ers. This was 1983. The 76ers had just won the NBA national championship. So they were the hottest of the hottest, right? And Julius Irving was right there in our city. And I thought, oh, everybody would love him. And if they knew it was Julius Irving, we'd have a packed house. That's the way I was looking at it. So I remember sending an invitation letter to the 76ers. Of course, I didn't really get a response. Ugh. So I said to Joe one day, I'm not hearing back from the 76ers, so I don't know if that's going to work. And he says, well, they practice out at St. Joe's University every day or every whatever. He said, why don't you just go out there and talk to him? And I thought, go out there and talk to him. Oh my goodness. So it was like, okay, now let me get my nerves together. So I'm gonna go out here and I'm just like, busting in on the practice. So I go and they're practicing and I just sit in the stands, just sitting there till they were done. No one said anything to me. It was perfectly fine. And at the end of the practice, as they were walking to the locker room, I moved up to him and said, Dr. J, and he turned around. I introduced myself. He shook my hand and we had this conversation. And I said to him, I had sent the letter and he obviously, I don't know anything about it kind of thing. And I said, well, I'm happy to. In fact, I think I had a copy of the letter with me. And I said, I have a copy of it here where you can have it. I said, but I would really like for you to consider it. So he said, I will consider it. Okay, so several weeks go by, we're getting closer to the dinner. We had sent out the invitations. I couldn't put his name on there because he hadn't responded. So I'm getting very nervous. I go back to Joe. I'm like, Joe, he hasn't responded. I don't know what to do. He said, well, has he said no? I said, no, I haven't. He hasn't said no. He said, go back to the gym again. Go back to the gym. And I was like, oh my God. So I go back to the gym a second time. When he saw me the second time, I think he said, I think that lady is really very persistent. So we kind of laughed about it. He apologized and he said, I will be there. He said, I will be there. And one of my board members had said, well, we can send a car for him to make sure that he gets there. So I said, we're happy to send a car. If you want to bring your wife, he said, no, it'll just be me. And he said, I will be there. So honestly, I wanted in my heart of hearts to believe that, but there was still this skepticism that somehow it wasn't going to work. We're at the dinner. We had made a backup plan, which was if he didn't show up, then one of our university presidents who was on the board was going to give a speech, right? So we get to that point, and the university president got up and gave his speech. And as soon as he sat down, the door to the ballroom opened and he came in the door. And I almost fainted, but I had to keep my composure. So he comes in, the crowd, everybody saw him and got up and, started applauding because it was a surprise because other than the board, no one else knew that he was even expected, right? So, so he comes in, I go over and greet him and take him up to the podium and all that. And then he tells this really what turned out to be kind of an embarrassing but beautiful story about how I stalked him to get him to come to this banquet. But he then turned that into a lesson, particularly for the students, around persistence. And it was just so beautiful that I think about it to this day, and it was just a great thing. So with that, then I learned, you can really make some things happen. So after Julius Irving, we had Ed Bradley, who is known for 60 Minutes, who happened to be from Philadelphia. So we were able to get him as a speaker. We even then, years later, when I was a regional VP, we were able to get the renowned jazz artist Wynton Marsalis and his group to come and perform for all of our interns at our regional conference. So I used that whole concept of just ask people, right? And if people understand what you're doing and what's happening in the community and how they can make an impact along with you, 9 times out of 10 they will help you. I think it inspired them to excel in so many different ways, because they were able to see others like them um, engaged and involved. So, for example, each intern had a business advisor and a business coordinator. The business coordinator pretty much worked with the intern around shaping their on the job work experience. So, if they were in accounting, or if they were in IT or finance, the business coordinator was working with um, the corporate managers to make sure the assignment itself was appropriate for the student. But the business advisor role was different in that it was more of a mentor role. And so the mentor was there as the person that you would go to lunch with, or the person that you might, go out for some like a picnic on a Saturday or do something with that was not related to the work. And I think those business advisors um, were really impactful with the students because they were able to ask questions and actually develop relationships. Here again, going back to the relationship model, they could develop relationships with these advisors, um, and maybe ask questions or talk about things that they couldn't talk about in their work assignments with their business advisors. So I think all of that was inspiring. And then on the internal side of INROADS, we were such a tight knit organization nationally, around national conferences for all of the students across the country. I can remember how the Philadelphia interns, the first time they went to a national conference, they were just blown away to see so many other students like them in this pursuit of the corporate dream, so to speak. And I think that helped to inspire them because they could see that, oh, I'm not out here doing this by myself. I have people like me all across the country